Welcome to the Rick Epps Real Estate Show, trying to make sense of this crazy Arizona market. And we've talked over and over ad nauseum about how slow it is out there and what a hard year it is for sellers. We're going to go through and take a look at some of the numbers and see if it's improving or not improving. And there's some interesting stuff going on. Not that it changes week after week, but you may see some things on here that surprise you. And if you really want some detail, right here is my data store. You can scan that QR code or use the link in the description down below, and you can request a personal zip code report or market report or mortgage report for your area. That's why I call it the data store, data or data, whichever you choose to like. Tomato. Here we go. This is the Cromford Market Index, and there's 11 of them that are now green that have improved versus last week, but it improves because inventory dropped and sales kind of stayed flat. So it's a measure of supply and demand. So it's not a bed of roses here if you're a seller. Basically, the Cromford people here said the trend, which started last week, has accelerated, and the market has moved in favor of sellers in the last month. Okay, but it says it's not all good for sellers because demand remains weak and is not improving. The reduction in competition among sellers is what is driving the new trend. And if I look at my 7-day moving average here, when I pull it up, you can see the yellow area here is the number of new listings coming on board, and the number of new contracts is the black line, and they're dropping. They're hanging consistently around 2,600 to 2,700 every 7 days. But it's the gap between number of new listings coming on board and new contracts that's actually making listings drop, and I will show you that in just a moment. In other words, the number of new listings that we have out there, they're just not showing up. So any talk of listings exploding for the summer have just not come to fruition. You can see it here. We've gone down again, and we're going to go down again next week, probably by another 100 homes. So there isn't this upward trajectory, which you are going to need to see price reductions in the double digits. We are seeing price reductions, but we're not seeing this fire sale that many have hoped for as buyers, and we are seeing with sellers definitely a hesitancy to move down. Mostly expired listings at the end of the month. I don't know when they're going to come back. If you've listed your home and your listing expired unsold, when are you jumping back in? Well, the main driver for that is right here with mortgage rates still hovering around 6.81. We've been stuck in this flat line for a long time. There's some, news coming up this week on unemployment, and I think the Fed chair, they have their meeting this week. I don't think it's going to mean too much. I read a lot of commentary about, well, if rates get down to 6.1, here it goes. I'm not sure that 6.1 pulls buyers out and brings sellers back in. I think it's a change. I think you'll see little blips on both sides. But with affordability being out of reach for a lot of people, I just don't see 6.1 being that magic bullet that everybody's hoping for in September and October. September and October, to me, is a seasonal change that will give us some increase in buyers and a slight increase in sellers. But I don't see a big movement towards here we go, the market is going to improve for sellers. I just see it still being a challenge for you if you're selling, that make sure you know what the market value of your home is. And by market value, try not to put too much weight on what sold 3 months ago, because that party is over. And when you look here, this is what's really interesting to me. You look at pending listings. It's the same week after week after week versus last year. Slightly lower, but not alarmingly lower. So the pending sales number, while it's down, and it's down to pretty much record lows, so why aren't prices dropping? Well, because we don't have a whole boatload of listings. So people they're pulling their homes off the market rather than saying, okay, I'm going to go down another 20K, another 50K. They're saying, I came, I saw, I went. And that's what's going on with pending listings. But when I look at this is the listing success rate. That's not matching last year. Listing success rate is 65.03%. In other words, of all the listings that are out there, 65% of you were successful in getting a contract. Now, this chart's not going to tell you how far down you had to lower your price to get that contract, but 65% of you did get a contract versus last year where 74% of you got a contract. That's a 10% drop. So it's saying to us that pending sales are about the same. We're selling about the same amount of homes week after week after week. But if you're a seller, there's only 65% of you that are actually finding a buyer. And if we take a look here and we look at the number of price cuts per week, they're kind of hovering around 2,920. They haven't spiked up too far, but it's end of July. And so I think the market is just in a, gosh, it's hot, wait and see mode, just like it is every summer. It's not like this summer's hotter than last summer, although what happened to the monsoons that we were supposed to have? Now, here is a secondary city snapshot. It's a brain melt here. There's too much data to take a look at. What this shows you is sales per year, days on market active, months of supply. This is what I mean when I say take a look at the data store. When you go up here to the data store, you can get a report for your area, your zip code, or your city that'll give you all this detail in a much easier to read format. So I encourage you to do that. The first chart that I showed you right here, which was the Cromford Market Index, you can also get that Monday morning in my newsletter. I know it sounds like I'm selling you a lot of stuff, but I really like giving you this so you can take the time to read it. And I'm not selling you anything. All of it is free. The Cromford Market Index, which is a measure of supply and demand, is showing a slight increase, kind of coming up from the bottom right. But again, that's driven because our inventory number has not climbed. It's still kind of dropping gradually through the summer. It will pick up again in September and October. I don't think it's going to jump up by leaps and bounds. I can't honestly give any kind of educated opinion on where I think rates are going to go. Either can the chief financial officer of the National Association of Realtors or Realtor.com. They don't know. They're guessing. The president's guessing. The Treasury Secretary's guessing. They would like to see rates really come down a long way. But I think, Pat and I were talking the other day on the show, and he said, he goes, I think there's some psychology here that's probably going to bring buyers back. And I didn't agree. I said, it ain't psychology. It's price. It's affordability. Yeah, there'll be a portion that'll come back in and go, I've been waiting for 2 years now. I'm going to bite the bullet. But I don't think it's going to change things too much. Days of inventory here, again, by zip code. I'm just saying 85226, which is a very popular zip code in Chandler, is showing that there's 63 days of inventory. In other words, if no homes came on the market, it would take 63 days to sell what's already out there. They kind of reached a peak of 66 and 66 this year, certainly higher than last year, but when you get towards Christmas, they come up at 68. And so homes are staying on the market longer. There's a lot more inventory than there was, but it's certainly not where people thought it would be. I remember at the beginning of the year, as the listings started coming on in January and we started approaching spring, there was a lot of chatter that inventory was going to explode this summer, and I'm not seeing it. There was also a lot of social media chatter going, this summer the rates are going to be back down and it's going to be a boomer summer, and I don't think so. Well, speaking of boomers that I just mentioned, here's a generation of people that have a hesitancy to sell because of capital gains tax. You've heard me talk about it on here and share my feelings before, and lo and behold, Business Insider has an article, Meet the Boomer Homeowners who are sitting on their valuable properties because of a tax they hope is on the way out. They've mentioned it this week. There's a bill being proposed that Trump is considering getting rid of the real estate capital gains tax. It says here, some older homeowners are discouraged from selling by the capital gains tax. That reluctance to sell may be exacerbating a shortage of family-sized homes on the market. They may. I agree with that. There's bipartisan support in D.C. for reforming or eliminating the tax to boost housing inventory. So here's one here that says that the 5-bedroom, 5,000 square foot Southern California home, I can't talk today, is too big for Friedman and his wife Catherine, who are retired empty nesters. They're eager to downsize. Single-story house in a 55-plus community where they won't have to worry about endless yard work and rising home maintenance costs. But the couple has delayed the move. That's because they don't want to pay the significant capital gains they'd incur. Since 1997, home sellers have faced a capital gains tax up to 20% based on income, on home sales with profits over $500,000, married couples $250,000 for single single filers. There are millions of reasons we'd like to move, but not because of we're just not because the tax is burdensome. In other words, they'd like to go, but think about this. Now, let's say that they bought that house in the 80s and they bought it for $275,000 and now it's worth $1 million. That $500,000 is going to cushion them that much. Now, there's talk about maybe indexing it to inflation to where now your exemption is $500,000, $600,000 for a single person, and $1.2 million for a couple. But why have it? I mean, this is my opinion. Why have it? You will need a magnifying glass or a microscope to try and find it in revenue in the federal government. In fact, I did a chat GPT search and asked them to analyze it. You can't rely on it. It's not totally accurate, but I don't think it was that far off. And they said it was probably estimated to be about $50 billion. We spend that in our sleep. So you've got these homes. Here's a couple that wants to sell their home. It's a big home. They want to sell it. They want to go to an over 55 community. So let's say that they end up making $800,000. So they got to subtract. You can take your capital gains and you can start subtracting all of the improvements that you put into the house. Kind of take a little bit of the bite out of that. But you're going to pay 20% on maybe, I'll say $200,000 to $300,000. Who wants that? 20% of $200,000 goes right to the government. You'd like to keep it if you could. If you can't, you're happy living there, then you're probably just going to be hesitant. It's probably not their main deciding factor, but you got to bet there's some people out there going, I just don't want to take a tax hit. Especially if they're reaching an age where they're thinking about, well, let's sell. Let's downsize. Let's take some of this money and we can put it aside for our long-term care coming down the road that we know we're going to be facing. I just think it's a win-win if they get rid of this tax. So let's hope they do, in my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments section. But I think I don't see them applying that towards investors. Investors tend to use a 1031 exchange, which means that when they sell a house, let's say they sell it for $300,000, in order to avoid the capital gains, they must buy another home within a certain time period. I think it's 48 days at $300,000 or greater. And then they keep rolling and stair-stepping up. And that tax policy is meant to help people move up in their house purchases without having to get dinged with capital gains tax every time. And investors take full advantage of that, and I think that's not a bad move. Even if they did put it for investors right now, I don't think that'll bring a flood of new homes on the market because they're still getting good cash flow using them as rentals. So it remains to be seen. Like everything in government, it moves slowly, although this year has not been slow. So we'll see what happens. I think when we look now going out the rest of the year, I don't see a whole lot changing. I know there's been some optimism about September, October. I'm not sure. Now, coming into the end of this month, in just a few days, my eyes, once again, are going to be on how many expired listings are we going to see, because they always reset the clock. So on August 1st, we will see a number of expired listings. It'll increase again on August 2nd and August 3rd. I think last month it was 1,050 or 1,200, something like that. That's a lot of expired listings. That's people that said, well, it didn't sell, it expired, I'm gone. So I'm going to see what happens, see if that happens again. That will temporarily pull listings down again, and then they'll creep back up as the month goes through. Also, speaking of national headlines, I'm seeing more and more, and I saw one yesterday talking about canceled listings, and that canceled listings are driven by buyers getting skittish and pulling out. And I'm telling you, no, it's not. In fact, our expired listings are not that big a deal here. I mean, our canceled listings, we're at about between 600 and 700 now, and that's where we've been. We peak at about 800 every 7 days. Not an alarming number. What's interesting is we'll have 800 canceled listings and then 800 back on market listings. So those back on market are a combination of either expired listings that came back on the market or canceled listings that came back on the market. A lot of those canceled listings are just people going, well, my realtor stinks. I'm going to change realtors. So it goes off the market and it comes back on with a new agent, new sign, new t-shirt, new marketing. Let's give it another shot. Same price. You're in the same boat. So if you come back as a canceled listing and you lowered your price, you've raised your success rate. There's 3 reasons for a canceled listings. They're not all just because buyers got skittish. Canceled listings happen if the appraisal doesn't come in. You're offering a certain dollar amount and it doesn't appraise at that, and you're going back and forth with the seller going, hey, let's try to meet in the middle, or can you lower your price to meet this appraisal? And if they don't, they're out. The buyer is hesitant to do that because they've already paid for the inspection. They've already paid for the appraisal, so they don't really want to walk away from that money, but they're not really anxious about getting a house that doesn't meet the appraised value, so there's pressure on both sides. So a lot of negotiation that goes back and forth, and sometimes that just results in everybody going, well, we don't have an agreement anymore, and they both walk away. The other one is if the buyer can't get financing. They're pre-approved, they were pre-qualified, maybe not pre-approved yet. So when it gets down to the end, they find some things that say, I'm sorry, I just can't get this buyer the loan. The agreement's canceled. And the third one, as I already mentioned, is just, sellers going, didn't work, take it off the market, I'm ready to move on. I know the contract doesn't expire for another 30 days, but I'm done. See what you can do to get me out of this listing agreement, and many do. I mean, look, if your seller doesn't want to pursue selling the house anymore, there's no reason for you to hang on to it. No, you're bound till September 15th. If I always tell my sellers, look, I have this agreement, and I put it in a listing agreement. If at any time you decide you want to cancel, just notify me in writing, and I will cancel this listing agreement. Because if you're not happy with me and you don't think the house is moving and you want to cancel, I'm not going to fold my arms and hang in there with you. We'll just say, okay, we gave it the old college try. Sorry it didn't work. Let me send you out a cancellation notice right away. So that's just a smart way to do business, in my opinion. So look, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, rick@rickhelps.com. I hope you found some useful information out of this. Share it if you can. Don't forget to hit the like button. Good to talk to everybody. Take on the day.